today's hosts, Camille Sharadou. Camille is our Vice President of Product Strategy here at Cybele. He works very closely with our strategic partners and our customers, as well as market analysts, to ensure that the platform meets their needs and anticipates the future needs. As a digital native, Camille has spent many years growing and helping companies thrive in fast-paced, scale-up environments. And before joining Cybele, Camille led strategy at 360 Learning at a New York-based edtech company. So with that, I'd like to welcome Camille and pass the mic off to you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Melissa, for the intro. And please don't hesitate to jump in when we have questions, when you want to answer some of them, or you'd like me to add some comments.
Absolutely.
And thank you all for joining today. Glad to have you all with us. So we're going to talk about breaking the data breach cycle indeed. And I'm hoping that after these next 20 to 30 minutes, you leave with a good picture of what that means. Probably you've experienced that. I hope not the hard way by yourself in your respective organizations. But the point of today is to share a little bit about what we see out there, what's common, what's frequent, where does that come from, what the big trends are when we speak data leaks, talking about IoT, talking about cloud, talking about supply chain. And then, of course, give you tips and a variety of actionable items so that you can actually do something about it. And we'll finish by discussing briefly how our solution here at Cybele can be used to mitigate some of these leaks that we're going to discuss. So throughout the conversation, do not hesitate to jump in, ask questions, interrupt myself and Melissa, and we'll make it as interactive as possible. So let's get started. And for this, maybe it's best to start with an example. We'll get plenty of example throughout the session. This one is quite famous. It's the actual Facebook databases leak that impacted somewhere around 420 million users back in September 2019. So somewhere around 9 to 10 months ago already, but big coverage, big impact, big consequences. This is just one out of many, as you know. If you just look at the press over the last few weeks or days, well, you see some big hacks on EasyJet databases, for example. You see leaks on a bunch of government agencies in the United States. Well, you know, you have many that happen in your LinkedIn feed or favorite press on a day-to-day basis. So it's not new to you. The issue, though, what we are talking more and more about is that every single of these leaks now, they can turn into devastating costs. And here I just took one example to illustrate that, again dating from last year, which is the Marriott fine following their 2018 mega breach. And it's quite a significant amount here, more than $100 million. So quite a lot of money, especially if this should have been or could have been prevented. So that's what I was meaning by not going the hard way about those leaks. And if you look at the variety of what we see, well, basically we can identify across the board 3 main root causes: third parties, accidents or negligence, and the cloud. So what does that mean? If you look on the left, supply chain exposure, what we've found out is that in the vast majority of the cases, 93%, looking at our entire customer base, most of the leaks are originating from third parties. So it's not the company itself, it's not necessarily your employees, but it's more what's outside your firewall and perimeter, your partners, vendors, suppliers, your supply chain overall, that is responsible for leaking some precious information. Second item or topic, cloud. And here it's no mystery. You guys all know it. Cloud is booming. Cloud adoption and cloud spend is growing like crazy. Just 2 numbers. Back in 2018, worldwide spend was 200 billion a year. In 2022, I will be closer to 350. This is Gartner data. So clearly, when this happens, and there is more and more data being shared on the cloud, on public platforms that you do not control by default, then risk increases. Lastly, accidents. When we talk cybersecurity, when we talk data leaks, we tend to think hacker targeting your organization. But if you look at the reality of those findings that we see, for example, across our portfolio, you realize that 91% of the data leaks that we find actually arise from employee negligence. Accidental leaks, because you leave something open on the internet, because you have that NAS drive that you use for both professional and personal purposes, well, this is a major source of data leaks. So supply chain, cloud, and accidental leaks, these are the three root causes that I wanted to talk about today. And this is more important simply because right now we are always talking about digital transformation. And with everything that's going on in the world right now, I'm thinking specifically about COVID-19. Well, we can't wait, right? Everyone changed their habits. I'm working from home, so is Melissa, probably same for all of you on the other side of the table. And what we said around digital transformation that was only years away, now suddenly has to happen right now. It has to change anytime soon. So how do we go about this while controlling and ensuring that you mitigate the risks? So three key things I wanted to mention in this new context, in this new era. First one is, the damages, they can now reach billions of dollars. I was illustrating that with Marriott, but this is now common. And this is simply due to the fact that there is a new nature and very high volume of threats arriving these days. Phishing, data leaks, fraud campaigns, and so on, you name them. And this happens at a moment where the attack surface grows exponentially, a little bit like the pandemic curve, right? And the thing is, everything that's happening now, these days, may remain silent for years. There are also more and more of those APT, persistent threats, that we are talking about. And people may get in right now, but the impact and issue may only arise afterwards. Second thing again, cloud. This I mentioned a little bit before, but the context is digital footprint expansion. Not just that you store and put your data in the cloud, but you basically change your entire processes as an organization, as a company, to support that move. What that means is that perimeter-centric security is no longer sufficient, right? Apps, data, they reside in the cloud, and the processes, the way to exchange, the collaboration practices, the communication tools that you use to exchange data, work with partners, and so on, they are all on the cloud, and they are all on the rise, especially these days with remote work. So that's what we face right now. Lastly, the environment is more and more complex. What that means is that remote work is now and seems to be, for at least a long period of time, the default way of working. And the way you use cloud is actually through what we would call hybrid architecture. You don't put all your eggs in the same basket. You may have on-premise platforms and software. You put some in the cloud as a service. You multiply infrastructure for disaster recovery purposes. So all this becomes more and more complex and hybrid. And if on the top of that, you add shadow IT, you add new types of devices like Internet of Things devices, everyone's personal laptop devices and so on, plus home networks vulnerabilities, well, that means that it becomes a nightmare to manage the IT environment, and looking simply at what's inside the firewall doesn't make sense anymore. So that's pretty much where we are starting from, and you'll see that it leads to a variety of consequences.
Yeah, Camille, so speaking of COVID, we did actually receive a question. Have you seen a spike in data leaks post-COVID-19? I think it was on the last slide that was sent in.
Yes, absolutely. In various ways, actually, what we've clearly seen is an increase in terms of phishing campaigns. So typically, they start with cyber squatting on domain name servers, where hackers try to create fake domains, use those to redirect you to these links, often linked with a credential theft, so that at the end of the day, there is a potential account takeover and network penetration. So we've seen that more and more over COVID, roughly doubled over the period between March and May. So this is what we see, but that's not just the only thing, right? Same for data leaks. I'll talk just a little bit after about ElasticSearch databases ransomware. So there is a clear trend right now. And as I've said, what we see now is probably going to be worse in a few months for all these persistence threats where people are already in but do not say it just yet. So what that means is that there are some nightmares ahead, and well, I don't know what's your sleeping position, but clearly I hope you're not the same here if you're the CISO of your organization and you still find some good time to sleep actually over the period. So let me share with you now a couple of examples that we've been digging out, finding out on behalf of our customers. I've taken 5 or 6 of them, trying to illustrate this with live anonymized data as much as possible. And of course, if you have a question on this, just let me know, just let Melissa and myself know, I'll be happy to answer. So this first one here that you see on the screen is what happened to a major cloud vendor out there. What you see on the left of this slide on the screen is basically the blueprints of one of their data center in Eastern Europe. So you can clearly see out there the various servers and bays of servers, the various areas of the data center, even a specific zoom on the security room details with the location of the CCTV cameras across the data center, and even in the security room, the location of the attack button in case of attack or intrusion in the data center. Clearly, if this falls into the wrong hand, that can mean a physical security issue, and that can mean customer data leaks as well for all those customers that have information stored in this data center. So where does that come from, actually? Well, here it's an interesting story, right? Because, of course, the cloud vendor did not leak that on purpose, right? But they have been working with an architect in Eastern Europe in charge of building the data center. And what you see here is architect plan that was simply leaked somewhere on the internet, simply because the architect put that blueprint on an unprotected server. And that server was open to anyone to access it. So here again, illustration of accidental leaks that I was discussing at the beginning, with potential huge impact for the actual cloud vendor. So good illustration that third parties can be leaking very sensitive information. Next example I wanted to share with you is in the aerospace and defense. So again, here very critical topics. What you see here on my screen is actually blueprint of a very specific part of a new engine of an aircraft. So it's public technology right now, but at the time we found this, it was highly confidential because there was a lot of R&D involved in this program. It was not yet released, it was still under development, and basically this work was done again with a supplier located in a very different side of the world in Taiwan, and that supplier was leaking actually that type of information, again leaving it open on the internet. The risks, as you can imagine, industrial espionage, business intelligence, and leak of intellectual property. So again, if this falls into the wrong hand, typically a hacker trying to push this to one of your competitor or reusing this against you to get some money out of it, well, clearly that means troubles and a huge impact for the organization. So again, very typical use cases, critical severity on what we find on a day-to-day basis. Another one that I wanted to share with you, we continue the review. This one impacted a major consulting firm. And what happened there is that we found on a GitHub repository an access to an unprotected cloud database. So this is quite a recent leak. You see, we detected that about 2 months ago, and of course, this is sorted, mitigated, remediated at the time we speak. But the idea here is that that GitHub account was actually including a variety of confidential accesses and information. For a typical client project containing URLs, usernames, passwords to access that project's database and also the production platform directly. You imagine the damages that it can create, when you have the exact URLs, the username, the password to get into the production platform. So massive damages ahead. Moving forward with another example. Here we go. Here is the telecommunications world. This time again, a little bit different, but quite recent, dating March the 11th of 2020. You guys probably know the telco world. Their most valuable assets, this is their customers' database, their customer information. And in this case here, we are talking about 300 million rows of detailed customer information that was being leaked on an open Elasticsearch database out there. The origin, again, a supplier, a third party. The telco worked with that third party on a specific data crunching project. And the consequence is, because that database was open, millions, so basically 300 millions of records, phone numbers, listings of communications, communication history, as you can see on my screen, including caller ID number, the destination number, how many minutes those calls lasted, and the actual timestamp, plus whether there was an answer or not. All this was left open on the internet. And here it's again image and reputation risk, but it's also something very important for those of you located in Europe or maybe in the US with the California Act. We're talking about GDPR or PII concerns and potential fines that can be linked to it. So for telco providers, it's highly important. The follow-up of this, when we do a little bit of digging and look at what we find on the Elasticsearch database space, we've been finding more and more of this. So is there a trend? Potentially. Here's just an example, again, around the same timeline as I was showing you before, May the 11th. What you see here on the screen is our findings at Cyber Angel, showing basically that on the 14th of May, there have been a huge increase in the share of ransomed, unprotected Elasticsearch databases. So from day to day, you see new groups of hackers pop up, going and scanning all the open databases out there, and basically trying to ransom all the ones they could access. And clearly here there was a trend, and it was actually the same group of hackers that was involved in these hacks of Elasticsearch over May. And it's still going on, by the way. The ratio is slowly decreasing. It's probably also because you have more and more Elasticsearch databases that are open out there. I think I have a last example that I wanted to share with you. Again, a real life example. This time a little bit different. We've talked about cloud assets. We've talked about databases. We've talked about third parties involved in the processes. So here again, it's a third party, but this time the actual vector of the leak is different. It's an IoT type of device, namely a CCTV camera. So yes, there are more and more of these in the streets, in the stores, in our day-to-day lives. This example is from a retail store in the UK. And what you see here on the left of my screen is basically the footage of a CCTV camera simply recording regularly a specific alley in that store on for whatever purpose. Here you see even someone in the store walking by and looking at some actual products over there. It's super recent as well, dating June. But the thing is, if this happens, if open vulnerable devices like this can be found, not only can you get an access to the actual stream, to the actual camera feed, but you can also potentially have access to the backend of that device, potentially opening accesses to documents that were stored in there. In that case, that was on an AWS S3 buckets that more than 250,000 documents were found. And here again, where it came from, well, it's basically that the company that is running the cameras, the CCTVs, was simply exposing some ports that should not have been opened on that specific device, providing an internet access to the database and to the backend of the cameras. So here again, clearly a risk in terms of PII, GDPR, California Act, and so on. So you see here the variety, and there will be more and more of this. This is just an example to illustrate IoT, but every single day at Cyber Angel, we see I would say 2, 3, 4 of these across our customer portfolio. And we are seeing this increasing considerably over time. It was not the case about a year ago. So you have to be covered somehow against this because this is part of your business. Stopping here for a minute, turning to Melissa, maybe we already have a couple of questions.
Yeah, so there's one that asks if we're a data loss prevention company, and another one that asks how we integrate with the rest of our cybersecurity stack. So I don't know if you want to tackle those now.
Sure, happy to tackle the first one, and maybe we get to the first one a little bit afterwards.
Sure.
Are we a data loss prevention company? The answer would be no. Typically, data loss prevention or protection is something that would sit inside the firewall. We would call this perimetric security. So the whole point of DLP systems is that your data is not exiting your company's perimeter. But based on what we've seen together here, this data here that I'm showing, typically the feed of the CCTV camera, is not something that you can properly classify. It's not something that is on your end and that you don't want to exit right. All this is already out there. And what we believe at Cyber Angel is that today, the job is not to make sure that the data is not exiting the perimeter. This is over. The data is already out there. However, the whole point is to make sure that you can secure that data before it falls into the wrong hands. So before an hacker actually gets to that data and uses it, weaponizes it against you. So that's the point and the complementarity, I would say. You need perimetric protection with DLPs, and then you need to monitor from the outside with this outside-in vision of what of your data is already out there and how you bring it back home. So CS is a very complementary solution compared to the main DLP solutions out there, like the Symantec and the Adobes that you may be running. All right, so what's coming next, given this context and with COVID and the challenges and changes we've been facing and that we are going to keep on facing in the coming weeks and months, plus this huge leaks context I've been describing? Well, I just try and summarize with 3 bullet points here on what you should be looking at, where you should be investing some more of your time. First, zero trust. It's not new. It's something that's been out there, namely thanks to the IBM teams for somewhere around 10 to 15 years, but it never really ramped up. Now, more than ever, is the time to adopt a zero trust approach. Don't think of perimeters and trusted networks as you used to think about them in the past. This is now over, and as you work with more and more third parties, vendors, suppliers, as the gig economy is ramping up, you need to adopt zero trust by default policies. First, you don't trust, and progressively you open things, and not the other way around. So that's really key in this new context. Second is a new focus, a renewed focus on resilience and security of third parties. If you remember the couple of examples I shared with you before, 4 out of 5 were linked to third parties. I say third parties, but that can also be, by the way, fourth parties or fifth parties. The supply chain gets bigger. And now is the time where you should focus on making sure that your partners and vendors, they adopt the same security standards as you do. Lastly, again, with the acceleration of cloud and the move to the cloud, we've seen security cloud spending booming. Well, it's about how you adapt to this trend, how you are flexible enough to move to that new model that brings more productivity, but also flexible enough to secure it, because it's not because you share that you shouldn't protect what you have been sharing, especially if you put critical data out there. So controlling the way you put data in the cloud, but also having the ability to scale up and down based on the context for you to be more agile, and also being able to react when security incident arises. So that's key topics that you should be looking at moving forward. And that's not just about the security teams and the security operations, it's broader in the organization. So going further, I wanted to share briefly a little bit about a couple of tools we put in place at Cyber Angel to help you move forward. First of all, something brand new that we've just launched last week, something that we call the exposure dashboard. So what is this? Well, super simple. We are going to look with this outside-in angle that I was discussing just before. So typically, you want to know what of your data is already out there. You just input your company name, your company domain name, you tell us which industry you work with, and typically you get access to that dashboard that you see on my screen, telling you how many servers mentioning critical documents of yours are unprotected out there, sharing just a high-level picture snapshot of 5 sensitive document leaks that may be critical and that you need to investigate, telling you also how many of your employees are potentially impacted by credentials theft, or at least exposition over the last 12 months, how you compare against the industry, and typically what's the volumes of documents exposed over time. And you end up with an actual exposure score, again, ranked against your peers in the industry, telling you basically if you should be worried about it or not. So super simple, no commitment on your side, a very easy tool to get that snapshot over the last 12 months of your exposure. And if you're interested in moving forward, then, well, what we provide at Cyber Angel is what you've just seen on the last screen, but we do it live 24/7 for you. So we couple harvesting capabilities, machine learning algorithms, and human expertise with cyber analysts to make sure that at the end of the month, we provide you in real time, high value impact data leaks and incident reports. Typically leaks that can, impact your business drastically, $100 million and over types of leaks. Always actionable incident reports, because our analyst team is doing the investigation for you guys. So really, it always includes the IP address that is involved, the source, the origin, which third party, which employee potentially involved in there. And what's super important for us as well is that we don't overwhelm you guys. We know that you have a lot to do. We know that the SOC team are very busy these days. So 0 false positive. We don't want to send you noise. We just want to send you signal. So 0 false positives is our promise. And to do so, we're just going to scan on a variety of perimeters. We've discussed cloud applications. We've discussed open databases, those ElasticSearch, those MongoDB, and so on. We've also discussed NAS drives, FTP, SMB, rsync types of connected storage devices and servers out there leaking documents. But you can also think of Cyber Angel with different use cases besides data leaks, such as phishing campaigns, brand protection, account takeover, and credentials theft, but also deep and dark web monitoring, this time typically focusing on those hackers that already have your data and are trying to sell it or use it against you. So really complete solution, complete platform, from data leak detection to brand protection to threat intelligence and deep and dark web. So that's really our value proposition at Cyber Angel. And we want to make sure that we bring that data back to you guys as fast as possible with the right tools and technology in place, but always at the end, the last mile being human intelligence, and that's super important for us.
Hey, Camille.
I think that's pretty much what we wanted to cover, Melissa.
Okay, great. So we did have a question. Once you find an alert, how do we take it down? How do we secure our data?
Usually, for the ones that I've been sharing with you as examples before, remediation is not the hardest part, because most of the time, this is accidental leaks from third parties. So what you have to do, and we help for that, we have actual remediation services that we've packaged with the offer, is that you need to engage with that supplier, vendor, third party, supply chain person, and mention that they have that potential server leaking information, or that exposed administration interface, or that typical drive left open on the internet. And it's a matter of a couple emails usually and a couple of phone calls to take down that impacted service. Of course, sometimes you have to escalate and you can start a variety of legal processes. We can help here as well. But remediation is something that every time is easily covered, either by your teams or by Cyber Angel. Does that make sense, Melissa? I hope I did answer the question.
I think you answered it perfectly.
In the right way in the chat.
Yep, I think that was perfect.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions coming through? Feel free to send them. And then, so going back to the original, well, one of the first questions, how does it integrate with the rest of my cybersecurity stack? Was that?
Sure, you're right. Thanks for reminding me. I forgot about this one. The point is not to multiply the tools, so we want to be as integrated as possible within your ecosystem. So imagine that you use a SOAR platform or an SIEM platform. I'm thinking, for example, about ServiceNow. Well, we typically integrate with those solutions. We have an API for that, and you would receive the output of what Cyber Angel works on right inside your ticketing system, right inside ServiceNow. And this way, every single pieces of information, content, and so on is part of your actual security ticketing system. So we fully integrate with the ecosystem.
Great to know. Okay, I think that's it for the questions as of now.
Wonderful. So you guys were a great audience. Thank you very much for being with Melissa and myself today. Of course, if you want to dig a little bit further, my last slide would be this one. You have my contact information. And if you want to access this tool I was mentioning by yourself, I'm just maybe going to conclude with that link that you see here on the screen, and we'll send it over to you in the recap email, cyberangel.com data leak exposure dashboard, to request an access and get that snapshot over the last 12 months. Happy to provide that to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Camille. I appreciate it. Great discussion today. And as he mentioned, we'll be sending along the recording and a couple different resources like the one on the screen right now to you within the next day or so. So thank you all so much.
Thank you
all.
Take care. Bye. Thank you, Melissa.